Today on the Writer's Gym podcast, we're joined by award-winning novelist Gareth L Powell for a conversation about genre and writing across genres. Welcome to the Writer's Gym podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Gareth, Rachel, Emily, hi, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
I feel like welcoming you back. You're the only one who hasn't been welcomed. Welcome, Chris Gregory.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, Gareth, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I was going to introduce you as a science fiction author, and I think probably primarily that's what most people will know you as. But you're not just a science fiction author, are you?
No, I am also Batman.
I'd heard this rumour, yeah, and Banksy as well, isn't it?
No, I mean, I wrote a horror novella that came out from Tor a few years ago called Ragged Alice. I'm currently writing a mystery thriller, and some would argue that the three books I wrote about a monkey earlier in my career are actually kind of techno thriller as much as cyberpunk. And
also one of them has the best title. Akak Macaque is just a brilliant title, isn't it?
It was Joe Hill, of all people, said it was probably the best title ever written. So,
do you think you're ever going to top that? Serious question.
I really hope so, because
it would be very ambitious to say no, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah, no, I used to have this horrible fear that I would get hit by a bus and all I'd be remembered for was writing these three stupid books about a monkey. So that's kind of spurred me on to write all the other books I've written since then.
So everyone gets their inspiration somewhere. So.
Well, indeed. And the thought of being hit by a bus actually probably inspires us all to not take that day off, not stay under the duvet and actually get up and do stuff, whether we're writers or artists or whatever.
And not trip over the duvet when we do get up.
And not trip over the duvet, because that could be messy.
Look both ways before crossing the road. That's my big one. I'm like,
just
both ways before starting to go well. You know, I'm just...
I can't remember who said it, but there's a quote that art is long and life is short and books are very hard to write. So...
Oh, what beautiful scansion.
We should probably put that in the publicity materials for this podcast, I think. As you've mentioned there, Gareth, there's at least three different genres, and monkey, if that's a genre. So we'll talk about those different genres as this discussion progresses. But you've also written a book about writing, haven't you?
I have. Well, I wrote it by accident, but yes.
That sounds very Douglas Adams to have written a book by accident.
Well, what happened was when I started writing like 20 years ago, I also started blogging at an old blogger.com. So I was writing down things I learned as I went along. And then that went on for years and years. And then about 2017, I decided to back all the posts up into a Word document, and it came out to like 60,000 words. And so I tweeted, I appear to have accidentally written a book. Luna Press sent me a DM and said, we'll publish it. So that's what happened. And then it came out as a small sort of pocket guide from Luna Press, and an editor at Gollancz liked it so much, she bought out the contract and we released an expanded hardback edition a couple of years ago.
Fantastic. Nice. Well, I mean, as this is the Writer's Gym podcast, and I think most of the people that listen to this are writers of some ilk, what's the name of the book and where can people get hold of a copy of it?
It's called About Writing. It's the authorized field guide for aspiring authors, and it's from Gollancz. It's available at all your favorite booksellers and a few evil ones too. And it's, as I say, it's hardback and it's full of great stuff.
We have a term, the rainforest site, on this podcast, so I'm sure it's there. But we will put a link to the book into the show notes of this podcast.
I think it also goes to show, like, in terms of as a writer, how you can be doing little things all the time and then suddenly find that they've added up. And you're like, oh, okay, that actually became a thing, and these little steps you're taking actually become something much bigger.
Austin Kleon has a book called Steal Like an Artist and a sequel called Show Your Work. And I can't remember which one it's in, but there's a chapter in one of them about how your flow becomes your stock. So you do something every day and then you end up with a huge stock of something at the end, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's the time when it becomes the best job in the world, isn't it? Where the things that are in your mind that come out of you because they are part of you do add up, and they do become something that nobody else could have written. And this is something I really enjoy, because when I was writing your creative writing toolkit, I was referencing all of the other ones that are everybody's different version of how to do what we're doing. And like everything else in writing, your authentic voice, the way Margaret Atwood does this, the way Stephen King does that, the way you do this, the way I do that, they're all going towards the same kind of destination, but they're going to do it in completely different ways, which is why I love reading so many of these guides and why you get something new from each one.
Definitely. I mean, when I was putting About Writing together, which was, putting the posts into a logical order so it went through the process and so forth, and then rewriting some of them, I was very keen not to be prescriptive. So this isn't a, you must do this, you must do that, this is how I do it, this is the only right way to do it kind of guide. It's more of an encouraging guide. This is more of like, here's stuff you can do, here's stuff you can try, here's how to try and find your own voice. I think my editor said it's much more like a wise uncle sitting around a fire talking to you, rather than a sort of school teacher wagging a finger at you. Which is why they got me in to do the audiobook, because they said, I don't think I'd be very good at fiction because I can't do different voices or what have you. But because that was written in the first person by me as advice, they thought it would be much better for me to narrate it.
We'll put a link to the audio version in the show notes as well. And I guess that's kind of the ethos of this podcast, isn't it? Really, we don't want to presume that we know more than anyone else, but what we do have, and what our guests have, is experience of writing, their versions of writing experience, and I guess what we're trying to do is just share that, put ideas out there, say, kind of, we know where you are as writers, we know what you're going through, we know the process, and this is our version of how we solved your problems. But
also even more importantly than that, the idea of it being the writer's gym is that you turn up and you do your little bits of weightlifting, and it's not about thinking I'm going to snap my fingers and be perfectly healthy and have it all sorted out for the rest of my life. It's coming back and doing a little bit and finding out what works for you. It's showing up.
Yeah. We'll talk more about techniques and the process of writing as this discussion goes on. But topic today is genre fiction, and I want to just go round and just get your views on this term genre fiction and what we think of it. Gareth, do you want to kick us off on that one?
It's something that people get very exercised about on social media. On the one hand, you have people saying, it's just a marketing term, write what you like. And on the other hand, you have people saying, well, actually, it's a very useful term because I know, for instance, in science fiction, a lot of science fiction is written in conversation with itself. So you're writing about topics that other writers have written about in the past, and you're finding new spins on them and so forth. So both those ideas are actually true. I mean, genre is a marketing term. It's, you know where to go in the bookshop to find the books you want. The certain publishers deal with certain genres. There's a kind of romantic idea that everybody is like Neil Gaiman and we can kind of wander around plucking ideas from wherever they come from and crossing genres at will and so forth. But commercial reality tends to be, if you're very well known in one genre, it can be a little hard to start in another one. But at the same time, I think each genre has its own traditions and its own conventions. So it's very useful to be versed in them before you attempt to write in them. So I guess what I've just said is genre exists and doesn't exist.
Yeah. And Emily, I want to come to you next. And you write in the genre that Gareth is best known for, I guess, which is science
Generally,
fiction
yes.
as well. I mean, what's your thoughts on genre fiction? And do you see it as restrictive or liberating?
I work in marketing, and I do think that it's mostly useful for that purpose. People who are looking for future stuff in space or in other worlds that does not involve elves often go for science fiction. And obviously there's a huge amount of crossover. If you look up science fiction subgenres, the list is insane. It's huge, which just goes to show exactly how broad the term genre can be, and almost how useless it is. Because almost the more you look into it, the more you're like, well, this is ludicrous. Like, you can't quantify things in this list. Lists are always limited, or they just go on forever. I think that what you just said, Gareth, about the fact that if you're writing in a specific genre, being well versed in that, other books in that genre is useful, and being able to sort of play in that ballpark is useful. And I think actually I could have done with doing that more, because my book has ended up being completely left field in the genre, and therefore, a bit of a problem. Then they also say that sci-fi has historically fallen into certain sort of tropes and certain, there are certain things that are associated with it that aren't that positive. And the best way to break out of that is to read in other genres and then bring sort of styles and ideas from those genres into science fiction to sort of break that up and mix it up. So I think there's definitely, genre can be a tool for writers to sort of say, okay, well, I'm in this little swimming pool over here, but I could potentially get out and go and dip in that one for a bit and then come back, get out, lay on my towel for a bit, it's more of a tool of a word, I think. But, again, if you look too closely at it, you realize how completely ludicrous it is, and, it stops really having any meaning.
Well, Rachel, I think your work might fall under the category of difficult to pigeonhole.
You're such a flatterer.
Well, but I mean, just to extend Emily's analogy, which sun lounger do you put your towel on?
Well, I would see your sun lounger and raise you kitchen table. My partner has a habit of leaving things out so he'll know where they are.
Oh,
and
my God,
our kitchen table, I am not judging, I am merely reporting, more or less. These things will be left out everywhere so that he'll know where they are. Now, sometimes that works, but gradually it becomes less useful in terms of knowing where something is, because there's lots of stuff out there. Oh, where's the X? It's right there. I didn't see it because of all the other things around it. Genre fiction for me is the better option to not having a system, because when we want to read something, yes, it's more democratic if I've, as I could so easily do, as you can probably tell behind me, have all of my books everywhere and all over the floor, but it doesn't actually get the mood that you're in or the thing that you need for useful reasons. That chaos stops being useful at a certain point. So I completely am on board with the need for a labeling system and to know where stuff is. My last fiction book, Twisted Branches, was published by Black Shuck Books, whose slogan, just to give fuel to your point, Chris, is publishing the peculiar since 2015. And Steve, who runs it, celebrates things not having necessarily, or not all of the things, having a natural home. Broadly, he started in horror and he edited Great British Horror, which is where I met him because I was recommended by an editor he knew, and that was how I came into there. So it came in through horror. But the story that I wanted to write, the kind of horror that I was interested in, I'm still interested in at that point, was what happens between human beings and how communication and misunderstanding shoots off everybody's lives in these absolutely horrible ways, in a variety of different ways that life can be horrible. And it felt like domestic noir, which is a subgenre of crime fiction technically. And that is a whole other argument that I will not go on about for hours. Just press that button and I would, but I will try very hard not to. By the time you arrive in it, even though it's technically a subdivision of crime, it is just as much horror for a bunch of reasons. So I just came in through what is not the conventional route, but then you could argue it's not the conventional route yet. People something, they do more of it. Like the term domestic noir was actually invented by Julia Crouch having a slightly drunken conversation with her agent trying to say what it was she was writing. And that became the name for it. So it is a question of listening to yourself, like Gareth's blog becoming that book.
Mm-hmm.
How we discover things. So yes, genre fiction is useful, but that's no reason for us to decide it's a prison rather than a liberation.
Emily, you want to make a point?
I've put my hand up like a child in class. Yeah, no. So
doesn't work very well in audio, that.
Not really, no. So
it was very sweet though.
Thank you. Yes, I'm being very well behaved. One of the things that is related to genre that I find is, okay, so the Twilight novels. These novels, I think, if you actually look at their component parts, should be horror. In every single conceivable way, they are horrific. You've got this predatory ancient creature going after a teenage girl, manipulating her, ending up manipulating her into an early marriage, hunting her, considering her food. It's a really horrible relationship, and it should be in horror, I think, as a genre. If you look at it for its component parts, it is marketed as a sort of YA romance. I find that categorization almost as horrific as the book itself. So the most horrific thing about this horror novel is that it is categorized in the YA romance genre. Yeah. And then it's almost like the horror of the thing is compounded by how it is sold and how it is marketed and how it is categorized. And then it's like, well, what genre is the process of putting something into a certain genre? Like this is a horror way of looking at it.
That happened really beautifully in the fantasy exhibition at the British Library that was there a few months ago. That when I went round that, two series that I absolutely love, Twin Peaks and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they had little clips of them. And in this exhibition about fantasy, the word fantasy could not be in any bigger letters than it was. The examples that they picked, both for Twin Peaks and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, are things that I would consider the most horrific imagery that each of those series used. So in Twin Peaks, for reasons I probably couldn't go into if I tried, somebody turns into the knob of a drawer and she's screaming. It becomes a fossilized wooden scream. And that is a pretty horror-centric image. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I don't know if you remember The Gentleman.
Yes, oh my God, yes.
Oh my God. And
I've had nightmares since. I've seen that episode once. It lives with you.
That episode is another one that I'm going to not start talking about now, but not because I don't want to, but there is a conversation we can have later on that if there is time. But for the purposes of relevance, both of them absolutely categorically horror. Definitely. But I guess for me that's the celebration of it. You know, it's a bit like dating, it's a bit like friendship. Nobody is just one thing. The more you get to know someone, the more you see the bits you weren't expecting, that every jigsaw is unique. You know, I don't think most people would be saying we've invented genre fiction because it can only be one thing. And yeah, I'm not saying the system is perfect. Like apples never fall, Liam Moriarty. If you took that blue and pink cover off and put a black and red one on, it'd be absolutely the same book, and it would pick up on different features that are the reasons that I enjoy her work so much. Somebody's going to disagree with each decision. Somebody's going to feel like it was more this colour than that colour.
My next question was going to be, and I think you've certainly given a view on this, Rachel, but I was going to ask Gareth, do you think that writers tend to have a default genre, the genre that they naturally just fall into writing in when they pick up a pen?
Well, it's probably different for everybody, but I would guess as a rule of thumb, you probably write in the genre you like to read, or that you grew up reading, because you write, I certainly grew up reading sci-fi, so when I first started out, I was trying to write these very literary books and I got bored after about 4 pages. And then I decided to write, what I enjoyed, and woof, here we are. Yeah, and I think that's essential because you have to enjoy what you're writing. You have to write the kind of books you want to read, and you have to kind of bring your insight and your voice to the table to join in with the conversation of all these people. I started out, I remember when I was 7 or 8 years old, kind of watching Star Trek and then going upstairs and getting a little spiral top notebook like this and writing a story that was 100% not exactly what I'd just seen with the serial numbers filed off. You just start doing that. It's where you start playing and you start making your own stories in the worlds you love. And I guess that's why fan fiction is a big way into writing for a lot of people.
Is that something you've mentioned boldly going into rewriting Gene Roddenberry's work. But did you write any other fan fiction before you wrote original stuff?
No, I always wanted to write. My very first book was a fantasy. I was 8 years old, and it was called Spiky the Dragon. And
it's a bestseller.
I wrote it at school, and then the teacher folded all the pages over and stapled them together, and I did the illustrations. I've still got it somewhere. It's about a knight and a dragon's egg.
Luna Press might be interested.
A dragon's egg rolls out of a nest, and a knight is riding along, and he finds it, and the egg hatches, and the knight and the baby dragon become friends. And he says, I will call you Spiky the Dragon, and they go off and have adventures. So.
That is so much better than the fan fiction I was writing when I was small. I hope we see it. Can we put Spiky the Dragon in show notes?
Well, I haven't got an ISBN number for it, so I
we could have a screenshot.
we could, yeah.
I will try and find it. It's in a box somewhere.
I think the world needs this.
Yeah.
Yes. Spiky's also spelt wrong as well.
That's brilliant. That's even better.
That's all
but it's a proper noun. It's the dragon's name. It's not wrong. It's just
this is true.
Specific.
Yeah.
Emily
could be Spike.
Spike.
Yeah, that might be how the dragons spell it. Fine.
Who knows? Emily and Rachel, I mean, was fan fiction a thing for you, and did that help you to find your genres or lack of them?
I didn't know that I'd written fan fiction until looking back at it from a long time ago, but I do remember being 6 years old and making little books and my mum stapling them, and it was all characters from books that I loved and sometimes TV that I loved, and I was just reordering the thoughts in my head, and I was making stories with characters that, it was being friends with the characters that are your friends in that way from what you read and what you watch. And certainly Star Trek, because I do joke that, I was brought up on Judaism was the main religion, and then Star Trek was ever so slightly below. But the whole belief system in Star Trek and the whole ethos of being the best version of ourselves that we can be and falling short of it and trying again. There's so many characters, there's so many thoughts in there that I think I can feel in the fiction that I'm writing now, because now that I'm writing all about communication and when that goes wrong and how when fear is motivating you, when you become the worst version of yourself, I think fan fiction is completely the way. And I don't think I'd have called it that, but in terms of working out why people do the things that they do, we're always looking at other people. We're always learning from other people first. So arguably, yeah.
Yeah. I wrote this is really tragic now.
We can edit it out if you like.
A sequel series to the Harry Potter books, and it started 19 years later, so on the day of that final chapter, and it followed completely different characters. It was actually much darker than the original series.
It would
characteristically, yeah, exactly. And true to form, I went into this universe. Everything that had previously been written was canon, so it was just building on it and sort of exploring the world as it is 20 years after this horrific world-changing catastrophe and event. And yeah, it was about this 15-year-old Ravenclaw girl and a first-year Slytherin, and they're not related to the Harry Potter kids. Those kids are in it, but they're sort of very much side characters, and what they're doing is going on in the background.
I'm going to say this like I've actually watched it, which I haven't, but Star Trek Below Decks. So it's different characters.
Except, okay, so these kids, it's the way I describe it is Harry Potter meets Junk by Melvin Burgess.
Oh, wow.
So these kids are orphans. They're the children of Death Eaters, so they don't get any sort of like sympathy in the world. And they have to fund their way through Hogwarts by mixing illegal potions and selling illegal potions on the black market. And so it's real, like it's drug den stuff.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure there's some illegal potion selling in our great universities and academic institutions.
Recreational drugs. I mean, some of those potions that you see in the Harry Potter books, it's like this is some trippy stuff.
It's split, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm only saying this in an excuse to try and make you write it and bring it into the world. But forgive me for forgetting which this was. But the Twilight books started life as fan fiction of something else.
No,
anyway,
it was 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey was Twilight, wasn't
Twilight
it?
fan fiction. Yeah.
So if you do, one does come in quite literally through fan fiction. There is always that option of making it your own world and bringing it forward. There's nobody standing there telling you not to do that except in
a
your
whole
head.
world of semi-junkie, potion brewer, magical students. Who knew the world needed that?
Can I get an idea, you people?
Go.
You could pitch that in 3 words: wizarding Walter White.
Yes. That could be.
Yeah.
And actually, one of them does end up going into the magical equivalent of the pharma industry.
Yeah.
Well, we've just made our way into the thanks to list.
We could call it Breaking Hogwarts or something, couldn't we? Or,
I'm actually writing this down. Magical Walter White.
Watch out for that, listeners. Gareth, I want to ask about conventions of different genres, and I guess, as you were saying, that you get into a genre because it's what you enjoy reading. Do you think that writing within those conventions is important? I mean, particularly, I guess, when you're trying to make your name within that genre, or do you think that publishers, the publishing industry, and readers are receptive to writers that try and break out of those conventions within the genre?
I think it's interesting that the more successful a book is, the less of a genre work it's seen as.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
So, for instance, say Cormac McCarthy, for instance, would write something that was basically a Western, but because it's Cormac McCarthy, it's mainstream fiction.
Yeah.
Margaret Atwood famously is not science fiction. She's mainstream literature. And you hear these arguments for why and for whatever. And I think it's fine to have imaginative books in mainstream literature. I think it does everything good. And they could be gateway books to other genres as well. And it's fine. But when you talk about the conventions of a genre, it's always very telling when a writer from another genre or a successful mainstream writer decides they're going to write a novel, for instance, using all the toys of science fiction. And so they produce this thing, which is they write an adventure book in which 2 characters escape the death of their planet and they land on a new planet. And at the end, you find out their names are Adam and Eve. And something that was hackneyed back in the 1940s, but there was a writer a few years ago, mainstream writer, who grandly announced they'd written a novel about a relationship between a person and a robot, and it had never been done before. So conventions in genre and traditions in genre are useful to stop you reinventing the wheel all the time. It goes back to what I said earlier about a conversation. Each new kind of generation builds on the generation before and brings something new into the works. We had the cyberpunks that we had before them. The new wave were bringing more literate influences in. We had the new space opera. We go through these cycles of new stuff. I think at the moment, what we're seeing is many more diverse traditions and inspirations and voices coming into the genre, which is reinvigorating it, which is fantastic. So the conventions are there, but they can be changed. And occasionally books within one genre will invent a new genre, or a new genre will hive off, like romantasy, which has appeared out of nowhere over the last year or so, and suddenly everybody wants romantasy. So these things they're not straitjackets, though. They're more amorphous. There's a porousness to the edges where they bleed off into other places, and you can take them to different places as well. And depending, as I say, how successful you are and how big your publisher's marketing budget is, you might be plucked from the genre you think you're in and put somewhere else. So sometimes an author becomes so popular and has such a distinctive voice that they become their own genre. And for Hemingway, there's that great quote that half the writers of the 20th century tried to write like him and the other half tried not to. Conan Doyle and Neil Gaiman, they develop this voice that becomes their own genre, and it becomes Gaiman-esque or J.G. Ballard in some ways, Ballardian fiction. If you become distinct enough, you become your own genre.
A really interesting point, actually, about writers from other genres writing within genres, and the example I read recently, Kazuo Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun, which is a sci-fi novel, It's a sort of AI robot companion of a real child, and it's pure sci-fi, but it doesn't even get called sci-fi because it's written by Ishiguro, and Ishiguro is not a sci-fi writer. I think that's quite odd, really, but I'm sure that's something, you wouldn't take one of a writer's novels and put them on a different shelf, unless perhaps it's Ian Banks or Ian M. Banks. And there's another example. Actually, some of the Ian Banks novels are very sci-fi, but because they're not about the culture, they don't get filed under Ian M. Banks. More of that soon, I'm sure, the crossing of genres. But Emily and Rachel, I would say you're not classic examples of writers within your genres. So, I mean, you've not presumably followed horror toolkits or sci-fi toolkits in the work that you've written.
I have never met a how to write book that was any good that wasn't about how to write like yourself. So this is not in order of preference, but just what I see behind my head on the screen right now. There are lovely guides in fantasy, crime, horror. When I was writing mine and when I'm reading one, what I'm always looking for is find the key that unlocks the door for you. So when I'm doing exercises for people, the reason I trained as a coach was to support the writers that I was supporting better, because you can't just put a thick line between what you write and your curiosity, your self-esteem or lack of, how much you're judging yourself rather than listening to yourself stands in the way of that. Now, I'm not saying that I say that to them the whole time. Sometimes I do, but what it's really about is making it fun again, making it curious again. So as long as the book that you're using is getting you to explore your curiosity, you might start out thinking, I couldn't possibly write science fiction, or the example that we were talking about in a previous episode recently, when I said categorically, I don't write poetry, I don't write songs. And having had the conversation with the person I was telling that I didn't do something, somewhere in there, something had listened and then started doing something.
And it turned out you did.
And this is what it is to be a human. So I would say read without compartmentalizing yourself. Read, enjoy, get curious. I think that there's no guide that hasn't had something useful in it. Yes, of course, I've got favorites. We'll all have favorites, but that's why we should all keep writing them, because we're all individuals.
Yeah. And Emily, I guess Dex Legacy happens to be set on another planet, but it could equally be, an imagined version of Earth with different nations, their political machinations, warfare against each other.
Yeah, basically the reason I set it on another planet was so that I could shed all of the history and stuff that has gone on Earth previously and have a fresh start and sort of think about things from a new perspective, new goings on, new all of this, without being encumbered by actual history that people would go and look up and recognize. So it gave an awful lot of freedom, but I was never going to pretend that humans are anything other than what humans are and take away the history that we've got on Earth and suddenly humans are ascended beings of, great enlightenment. No, we're war monkeys. And that's sort of what it comes down to in many ways. People try, but conflict is almost inevitably a sort of upshot of human society and increasing populations and resource management and all of the rest of it. So the Dex Legacy is sci-fi, but what I'm more concerned about as a writer is writing true things. So it's doing something very specific with the sort of idea of super soldiers, but it's doing them with a no bullshit kind of filter, like removing the filter kind of. And every time I felt like I was softening something or being kinder than, was necessary, it's like I had to sit down and have a conversation with myself. Like, why am I hiding from what this would be like for these kids? Why am I hiding from what these psychopaths would do in this situation? Why am I trying to soften this? Is it because I'm scared of it? Is it because I don't think it's very nice? Is it because I think the readers won't be able to cope? So basically being very self-conscious about why I'm writing what I'm writing and shedding as many of the sort of like predicted outcomes that are outside of the text as possible, and just being like, no, okay, this is the story. This is what it is. This is how I think these characters, being completely true to themselves, would behave. And it's ugly and it's not nice. And this is how the world responds. There's no sort of morality there necessarily. I think I'm just sort of exposing the horror in it and expecting the readers to sort of read it and find it horrific. If they don't, then that's a reflection on them, I'm afraid. And it has occurred to me before.
But you can enjoy it on many levels.
Well, I mean, like, there's the Homelander sort of situation in The Boys, where it turned out that quite a few people thought Homelander was the hero, not the villain. And there was, stuff came out, people going, wait, what, he's not the hero? And a lot of the internet going, oh, honeys, no. And so it's amazing when you do something like that, sort of the different interpretation
turns the mirror around onto the reader, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it has occurred to me that maybe some people think Nathaniel Dex is the good guy. I really hope it's not many, but
no, not even I, who play him in the drama, would suggest that. Quite the opposite, in fact. So Gareth, I mean, we've talked over the last few episodes about kind of writing habits, writing inspirations. Last week we had a chat about playlists. I mean, do you have a different set of writing habits, mood boards, playlists for the different genres that you work in?
No, I'm far more chaotic than that.
Good to hear it.
That sounds like organisation, and I don't do a lot of that. I sort of just sit down and get stuff done. I'm currently writing a space opera and a thriller at the same time, which is interesting. I'm about a third of the way through both of them, but I'm not finding it difficult to keep them separate in my head. So I'll wake up one morning and say, today's a sci-fi day, or I'll wake up and say, today's a thriller day. But they're very different. And they have certain things in common, like pacing and characterization, but the worlds are so different, and one's written in first person and one's written in third person. So I'm not finding that they're bleeding into each other at all. And it's actually quite refreshing to, when you get stuck on one, to just move to a completely different genre for a while. And so that's working pretty well for me.
And when you get into, I mean, presumably if they're both kind of keeping track in terms of how far through you are, you might find that you finish them at the same time, and then you'll be editing them at the same time. And do you think that editing process of hopping between genres is going to be as easy as you find the writing process, or do you think that might be different?
Well, just to put the cat amongst the pigeons, I've also got 2 other books to edit as well. So
just ridiculous, Gareth. Ridiculous.
I've actually got 4 books in process, 2 of which are coming out next year. And then there's 2 I'm writing, which will hopefully be 2026.
Yeah. So you're a sort of, the word in my head is centrifuge, that this is shooting off this sort of different tabs open in your life at the same time.
Oh, I've always got like 30 tabs open in my brain.
That's so good and interesting to hear, because I like to have at least 2 things going, because when the procrastination fairies arrive, rather than go moving away, I find that I go from one to the other. Does that happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And although we have just accepted an offer on one of those 2 books, so I will have to write that. I'll have to concentrate on that.
Better do that one. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, congratulations. The answer I wanted, Gareth, was that in your garden you have different sheds for different genres. Roald Dahl had his writing shed, didn't it? And I kind of imagined you thinking, oh, it's Tuesday, I'll go to the sci-fi shed, and the shed would have little spaceships hanging from the ceiling. And then you go to the thriller shed, and there'd be like a gun on the door and stuff like that. Maybe that's just a me thing. I don't know, but that's.
I think you've got sheds. I think you're projecting your sheds onto other people.
I don't have sheds. I want sheds, but I don't have sheds.
You are projecting sheds onto other people.
You are projecting sheds.
Yeah. Sorry.
Shed projector.
We'll edit all of this out. But Emily, what about you? When you do go from genre to genre, but do you have different writing approaches, from writing novels to writing audio drama, for example?
No, it all kind of has to happen on the sofa, laying very still with my headphones on, in my own world for a long time. It's very annoying that, life sometimes gets in the way of this, but I do work best. My best way of working is like that, just on the sofa, me, good 5-hour stint, and I won't even move. And I'll just write. And that is when I can really sink into it. And I'll write a whole episode of an audio drama like that. That will be the most productive. Having said that, I did write the best episode, I think, of season 2 was written while I was sitting on the bed and my spouse was trying on clothes and demanding opinions on the clothes every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. And I was having to break in the middle of this very, emotional conversation I was scripting, say, yeah, okay, I'm not sure about the neckline. Okay, yeah, turn around. Yeah, okay.
And then back to War and Devastation right. on the left. Yeah.
And actually some of my best writing. So maybe my best is when I'm distracted by people. And I have joked that maybe every time I've got a really serious deadline, I need to buy Danny a whole load of clothes.
New wardrobe.
And
do a fashion show.
It's pretty good precedent to set.
Yeah,
I'm sure Danny would enjoy that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So lots of writers adopt different pen names for their work in different genres and styles. And that's not something you've done, is it, Gareth? I mean, you don't become kind of Daphne Panhandle for your thrillers, or Gareth M Powell or anything like that.
Daphne Panhandle.
I think Daphne Panhandle. I made that name up, and I thought I'm going to have to write something around that name now. But sorry, Gareth.
No, but then I don't think I've strayed far enough from my kind of core readership to need to do that. It's something. The thriller I'm writing, my agent sent it out to publishers, and one of the things she has said is that we will consider a pen name if you think it's necessary, because while I think my existing readers would quite happily come with me because there are some speculative elements in the thriller, it's whether the people who pick up the thriller then go back to look at my back catalogue and go, what the hell is all this? There's monkeys and talking spaceships, and it would totally, So from that point of view, it's completely a marketing decision in that we would probably use something like G.L. Powell instead of Gareth L Powell, just to make it, just not to freak out the new people, really.
Yeah, and there is this phenomenon that people say, I don't like sci-fi, or I don't like crime, or whatever, and they just won't read across that genre. So I guess there is that, as you were hinting, I think that putting a little dotted line between that writing name and that one, and what that writer does and what that one does, might actually be something that a marketing person would advise. But I want to ask, is there something about putting on different personas perhaps to write in different styles? Is that something that you've ever considered or dabbled with, Gareth?
I'm not sure. I mean, the example that sprang to my mind was John Courtney Grimwood, who wrote science fiction as John Courtney Grimwood, and then wrote a sort of mainstream book as Jonathan Grimwood, and now writes thrillers as Jack Grimwood. So it's delineated, so you can tell, where you're going, and not get confused about which is which. I think once I discovered my voice, I can't help but write from my voice. So I don't kind of put on a persona. Yeah. But when the last 6 or 7 novels I've written have been in the first person from multiple viewpoints, so I have kind of inhabited the characters kind of like an actor in some ways, and just kind of channeled them onto the page as narrators, but still very much with my own voice behind them. So it's I don't kind of put on a persona. I find it's better I write more authentically when I just write as me. So rather than trying to be the next David Mitchell or something, and kind of trying very hard, I think it's very difficult to maintain that for 100,000 words.
Yeah. Rachel, do you kind of have a persona when you write? Do you adopt a persona for each project or each book?
My surname is not my birth surname, and I got rid of my birth surname because of whose surname it was, and that he had not been in my life in positive ways. And by changing my surname, I found that I stepped into myself in a way that was psychologically helpful.
Yeah.
I was walking around W.H. Smith long before the police report that forced the decision, and for some reason in the books that I was looking at, and it was just a genuine thing, I did make a police report about my father when I was 18, and I didn't want his surname after all of that. So before that had happened, I was walking around W.H. Smith in the books department when that was more of a thing, and R.S. Knightley came into my head. S is not my middle initial, but that was the name I published my first ghost story in an anthology under. And at the time, it was phenomenally helpful. It was just a shove in a direction of who do I choose to be, not who am I waiting for permission for somebody to say I can be, but who actually am I. I dropped it after that anthology and went back to being Rachel Knightley, which is now legally my name since I was 21. And yeah, it was great, but it was for a psychological reason. I find, as Gareth said, that it's about getting into you. And if there was something that made me think, do you know what, it would just be fun to play with another name, I'd absolutely do it. But I think the people that I've heard worrying more about what name they write under when they start than what they're writing, it's just about not putting the emotional cart before the horse. Get to know yourself in whatever ways that works, but don't, as I'm often saying about people trying to edit before you'd written, it's no good obsessing over the color of the curtains when you haven't built the foundations of the house yet. You don't know. You can't edit what you haven't written. You can't know for sure what's going to be the finessing until you've done the deep stuff. And actually the deep stuff is the wonderful bit. It's exciting. It's interesting.
Yeah. Gareth, is there a genre that you would like to write in but haven't yet? Maybe this forthcoming Daphne Panhandle novel, perhaps.
Yes. Should we be asking Daphne at this point?
Do you two want to be alone with Daphne?
Is Daphne in the room with us now?
It feels like it.
I tend to just, as I say, follow my interests. So I'm always been interested in science fiction. So I wrote science fiction. I've always been interested in making money. So I'm writing a thriller. And I've dabbled in horror because I've enjoyed like the Alien movies and The Thing, and so I've kind of brought that kind of horror into some of my sci-fi as well. I'd say my novel Stars and Bones is very much a kind of cosmic horror novel smuggled into my other space operas. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any great desire to go out and write a romance or a Western or anything like that. And I would be absolutely terrible at it because I have no familiarization with those genres at all. So, but I'm just kind of, I don't have one I would like to have written in. Otherwise, I would have tried to write it by now.
I mean, let's think now about cross genres, because there are lots of examples, and we've mentioned some today where genres seem to come together. And you mentioned westerns there, but there's Westworld is as an example of sci-fi meeting westerns, isn't it? What do we think about mashing up and mixing, crossing genres?
I would be tempted to go back to Leanne Moriarty, Tana French, where the domestic noir that I'm interested in, that came through crime fiction. But like I said, if you put a different colour scheme of cover on a lot of those, I mean, Tana French has escaped pinkification because it is that bit more violent and murdery. But what's going on with those and what's going on with Leanne Moriarty, that is all domestic noir. And I'm bending the question slightly, but there are examples where you can absolutely see it could have been more than one thing and a decision has been made. And probably, as Gareth mentioned, the reasons are because they need to be as much financial as literary in those cases.
Yeah.
And, that's not a criminal offence. That is a necessity of an industry. It's a good problem to have.
I do get slightly impatient with the self-appointed genre police who will go around and go, this isn't sci-fi, this is space fantasy, this is because X, Y, and Z. And it's just like,
it's a book, it's a story.
Yeah. I have no interest in kind of defending the borders because, as I said, I like them to be slightly porous and
absolutely.
And if you want wizards in your space adventure, Star Wars is, that's fine. It's just a different flavor of the same thing. So I don't like that, the kind of tribalism that I only read this stuff and I'm going to decide which stuff falls into this little silo, and I'm going to keep out all the other stuff. That can be annoying.
Well, limiting,
exactly.
To you as a reader, I guess.
I was just thinking about the movie Blade Runner, which is very much a kind of old-fashioned detective story that could almost, almost a pastiche of something like Bogart's The Big Sleep, but with replicants in it. So it becomes sci-fi, but it's and actually a lot of early genre stuff was written in that kind of Ellery Queen, kind of Dashiell Hammett kind of first person thing, but with different furniture. So I don't think it'd be too purist is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Well, we're coming to the section of the podcast where we think about challenging our listeners and offering advice to them on genre stuff. So Gareth, I'm going to come to you again and get some thoughts from you on advice that you would give to a writer who was just starting to write in a new genre. Are there any tips and tricks that you would offer?
Just read everything you can find in that genre. Read the good books and try and figure out why they're good. Read the bad books and try and figure out why they're bad. Try and work out what it is about that genre that appeals to you, and plant your flag there and explore and unpack why that appeals to you and what you want to say, why you feel that genre is more suited to say what you want to say than another genre. So, for instance, if you're basically writing a Western, but you want ray guns, why not write a Western? I mean, it's make sure you know why you're going to that genre and what the conventions and limitations and opportunities of that genre are.
I guess, the question, I know you've said something like this before, Emily, is, all writing is about human beings, isn't it? And it's what your genre, your setting allows you to learn, or you and your readers to learn about humanity and people and relationships. And why is that the best way to learn that thing that you want your audience to learn? Rachel and Emily, any thoughts on putting on a new genre? I mean, other than get a pink shed or something.
Can I stay with something Gareth was saying in terms of not just writing in a new genre, but turning up to a new blank page? That thing about why you want the things you want. There might be a reason that even though you don't consciously know why yet, that the ray guns belong in the thing that you might not think that they should belong in. And it's not always a case of just say, I can't have this. It's a case of why do I want it? So Emily talking about the why, Warren, stay with the confidence, or at least I prefer curiosity of what is it that is here, and keep on digging. And you will have to change a few things, but there's always more to come. And it's just that trick of staying curious rather than being thought police. I mean, the saddest thing I ever heard someone say, and it was said so confidently, was, I don't write a thing down until I've twisted it around in my head like my head is a washing machine. I've thought of everything that could possibly go wrong with this idea, and I don't write it down if I know there's going to be something wrong with it. When did you last write? About 10 years ago. And it's
that would be why. Yes.
I know it's
You've
terribly
been on
sad.
spin cycle ever since.
It's happened more than once, sometimes with people who have MAs in creative writing. This is why I'm saying it can be so easy to slip into that false confidence, that false clarity, false certainty. So just having that feeling of curiosity, because you're not trying to write something perfect, because as mentioned, human beings. Keep going down there, keep finding what is under the next layer of soil. It will make sense.
Yeah, for me it's about peeling back, as I've mentioned before, peeling back the bullshit and finding what's underneath it and what's driving it, peeling back your own bullshit and working out why that's even there. And it's about, genre then becomes a secondary concern. It's about why you're telling the story, why there are certain things in it, why are these things important, and why do you think you need to add that? Is that important to the story? Is that important to this? Or have you just stuck that bit of bullshit on top of it because you think you should. It's about peeling back the layers. I mean, we all know we're many layered things. Most of our layers are made up of things that we never intended to sort of wrap around ourselves, that have been wrapped around ourselves by other things. So it's sort of, it's a process of peeling it all back. What is this layer? Why is it here? What is this layer? What's that doing? You know, is this serving what I want to create at this moment in time? Getting to the essence of it. And as a copywriter and as somebody who deals with language quite a lot, I do it with language as well. I peel back the sort of, like, why am I using this word? Is it because it's a nice word? Is it because I've been told that I need to use long words as a writer? Does it serve me? No, like, throw it out, do something, like, get to the truth of what I'm doing, like, get to the essence. And that's very important. I mean, language is lovely. I'm not saying, don't use long, lovely words, but it's as long as you're using the right long, lovely words and they are there for a good reason, as opposed to just, I'm a writer and I want to show off my vocabulary.
And I can. And I've just bought a new thesaurus.
Exactly.
Say the thing.
Say the thing.
Say the thing.
Perfectionism is the enemy of progress. So, I would also make the point as well, going to what Emily was saying as well, that genre isn't an end in itself. I sometimes find that I've done a lot of lectures on creative writing at various universities, and occasionally there will be a student who's decided he's going to write this 9-volume fantasy epic, and I would sit down with him and say, "What's it about?" And he goes, "It's about this war between the goblins and the elves or whatever." And I go, "Well, what about it?" "Well, what happens?" I go, "Yeah, but what are you saying? What is your book about?" When people ask me what my books are about, I usually say about 370 pages, but
about $9.99. Every good bookshop.
Yeah, it's what Emily was saying. You have to be telling a story. And you don't just sit down and think, right, I'm going to write some sci-fi today. You sit down and you write a story and you use the genre as a storytelling tool rather than as an end in itself.
Yeah,
great thought. Yeah. I'm still intrigued by Emily's image of peeling bullshit, but we'll think about whether we edit that out or not.
We are all onions.
We are all onions.
We are all onions.
Yes. Rachel, do you have
are you an onion?
Are you an onion?
We're all onions.
And do you have a shed? Do you have a writing challenge for us?
The most important thing that has come out of every single thing that we have said is that writing like yourself is something that only you can do. So there's knowing that, and then there's spotting the obstacles. My creative I dare you for this episode is spot the should fairies. The should fairies will be circling. I don't care how much you've done before. I don't care how confident you feel. There's going to be a should fairy that stops you from doing something that maybe you don't know why you want to do it, or that doesn't belong in that genre, or something like that. Spot them and shoot them entirely non-literally, because they are non-literal beings, and stay with the curiosity. So that's the I dare you, is spot what is an I can't, I'm not allowed to, and what is an I wonder what happens if. And I dare you to do the next piece of paper like that.
Very good. Gareth, have you got something that you would like to, if you were talking to a writer that was just starting in a new genre, a challenge for them, something they should try?
Or anybody at all.
Or anybody at all, yeah.
Yes, just try and get away with something. When I was writing my novel Fleet of Knives, I got to a point, and the chapter 49, the infamous chapter 49, and I thought about, because I was writing it from different first-person viewpoints, and I thought about what this character's reaction would be to the previous chapter, and it would be 2 words. So I thought, I'm not going to sit here and write a 1,000-word chapter when those 2 words just completely sum up what this character was thinking. So I cackled to myself, and I turned the page and I started the next chapter, and I thought, I'll never be able to get away with that. But my editor loved it. So it stayed in, and people are, I still get people who are reading that book for the first time going, oh my God, chapter 49.
Yeah.
if you don't think you can get away with something like Rachel's should fairies, just try and get away with it.
Yeah.
I love that. The one that they remember is 2 words. I mean, that means that the 2 words are absolute solid gold. You have mined them to the heart of the bullshit. And, that's what's left.
You've peeled back the layers of bullshit.
It's 2 words and they're gold.
Set your controls for the heart of the bullshit, as Pink Floyd did not say.
Yes.
Careful with that bullshit, Eugene.
There's
Gareth,
lots of bullshit going on today, apparently.
There is a lot of bullshit, and most of it coming out.
But we're shooting the bullshit.
We're
not keeping it. We're going to the middle for what the bullshit is protecting us from.
Shed the bullshit.
The gold at the centre.
Being the shed with the bullshit. With the
I got that.
Sorry, I went there. Yeah, thanks.
Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today on the Writers' Gym. Where can people find out more about you and buy your books?
There's my website, which is GarethLPowell.com. Mm-hmm. I've also, my wife and I have also just started a cross-genre small press. We're crowdfunding our first anthology at the moment, which will contain sci-fi, fantasy, horror, mystery. And you can follow developments there via her newsletter, Jane Dear Gammon. You can find her at janedeargammon.com and online all the social medias as well. So that's very exciting because we just weren't busy enough. So
no, I could tell you weren't busy enough. Well, look, we'll post all sorts of links in the show notes for this podcast. Gareth Powell, Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you so much for joining us on the Writers' Gym today.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you for listening to the Writers' Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writers' Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writers' Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writers' Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.